And we should be live. There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm about a minute early. We're going to start, in about a minute or so. I'll introduce myself and I'll go through the things that I want to talk about. I just want to make sure, can anybody comment and let me know if you can hear me? You should be able to hear me, but I just want to confirm that. I can see the comments here. There's nothing yet. All right. So once again, can you hear me? If you can hear me, please write as much in the comments, and then we'll get going. So I'm not seeing anything at the moment. Just gonna write a little hi. That's me. There we go. Yeah, so just let me know if you can hear me. And if you can't hear me, obviously somebody will write something to that effect. But everything should be good. We should be good to go in about a minute or so. I have not done a lot of live streaming, so this is still relatively new to me, but everything seems to be functioning. So I'll start once again. Anybody, just let me know that you can hear me. So I'll start with who I am, why I've been invited to take over the live stream for Build Up Dietitians. I am not a dietitian. My name is Jonathan Jarry. I am a science communicator with the McGill Office for Science and Society, or OSS for short. I'm also a podcaster for The Body of Evidence. My background is, again, it's not in nutrition or dietetics. I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. I have a master's degree in molecular biology. I've worked for a few years in molecular pathology, so using all of these tools to diagnose people with certain diseases, also to influence treatment, specifically for cancer care. I also worked very briefly in forensic biology, so using, again, DNA identification to identify dead bodies. I started a PhD in human genetics, which I quit. I spent about 4 years in low vision rehabilitation research. And now I am a science communicator. As I said, I'm working full-time at the McGill Office for Science and Society, where basically our office has existed for 20 years now. It was started by 3 chemistry professors at McGill University, and the aim of the office is to separate sense from nonsense when it comes to science. So we will write and talk about topics like plastics and cosmetics and pesticides and alternative medicine and the history of science, et cetera, et cetera. We also have the benefit of having great relationships with a lot of different journalists, and so we do a lot of media interviews to help increase scientific literacy in the public and to make them understand what is going on. Of course, now with COVID, we're doing a lot of disentangling what is true, what is not true about the new coronavirus. I've been asked to let you know where to find me. So I have a website that sort of archives all the stuff that I do. It's myname.com, so jonathanjarry.com, Jarry. The podcast that I co-host with the cardiologist is at bodyofevidence.ca. You can find me on Twitter if you just search for my name. And the office at McGill, we have a website. It's mcgill.ca/OSS. We have our own live stream, which we do every 2 weeks, usually with a guest, often on the topic of COVID. So we have one a week from Thursday at noon Eastern Time. We also have a newsletter that you can register for on our website, mcgill.ca/OSS. And it will contain like all of the stuff that we write. All of our media appearances are all there, and it's released every Saturday morning. So what I wanted to talk about today, and again, if you have any questions throughout this, please write them down. I do want to answer your questions as well. This is not really a talk. This is more of a Q&A. But what I wanted to address, and to sort of echo what Timothy Caulfield said last week on this page, I wanted to talk about pseudoscience and misinformation, why it is so important. He talked mainly about how to address it. I want to explain what it is, how to recognize it, and what are some of the common themes that you might come across as a dietitian, that your clients may bring to you. And so the first question is always, why should we care, right? Why is addressing pseudoscience so important? And it's an issue with, there are lots of different reasons why addressing it is so important. I mean, obviously, the information ecosystem that we're all living in with traditional media, with social media, it can bring a lot of confusion to people, and this confusion can affect their behavior. There is physical harm that comes from believing in pseudoscience. We can think of people who are unvaccinated. We can think of poorly regulated supplements, which appear to be safe, but many of which contain things that are not listed on the packaging. It can even mean avoiding necessary medical care because you believe that this thing that you're doing, that you've been sold by somebody who is peddling pseudoscience, that this thing is going to cure you when in fact you really need medical care. There are also financial harms to addressing pseudoscience. Supplements are not free. You have to purchase them. You may even fall into this trap of buying more expensive food, thinking that it will improve your health when there is no evidence that this particular type of expensive food will actually help you, and this eventually just harms your wallet. I wanted to talk about how to identify pseudoscience because this is a problem that has been discussed by philosophers of science for decades. It's this idea of, is there a line, right? A very clear, simple line that distinguishes science from pseudoscience, so that things on one side of this line are clearly scientific and things on the other side of the line are clearly pseudoscientific. And what these philosophers of science have come to realize that there is no line. It really is a spectrum. There's a gradient from something that is purely scientific to something that is purely pseudoscientific. And different claims and different sort of gadgets end up somewhere along this spectrum. But there are what are called red flags that we can learn to identify. If something has these red flags, has some of them, many of them, it's a good sign that this thing is probably pseudoscientific. So there are no very clear, rigorous criteria where if something fits the criterion, it immediately is pseudoscientific. But there are some red flags that will hopefully impact how you decide if something is pseudoscientific or not. And these are even things that you can teach your clients who want to be better able to distinguish between things that are science-based and things that are not. So pseudoscience as a whole means fake science. It means something that looks like science, but that really isn't. So it's using the trappings of science, and sometimes it's using preliminary findings in science to sell you something that is not actually scientifically proven, and that sometimes is even proven not to work. So that is what pseudoscience is. And one of the red flags of pseudoscience is this idea of extraordinary claims. For example, you will see products that are claimed to cure virtually every every health disease out there. This thing can cure it, including cancer. If you know a thing or two about medicine, you know that there is no one thing that cures everything. And yet, in the domain of pseudoscience, it is not rare to find extraordinary claims of cure-alls, which don't actually exist in the world. Another red flag for pseudoscience is that they will often foster doubt in the scientific and in the medical establishment. Now, there's definitely room for a healthy criticism of science and of medicine, but what pseudoscience tends to do is to go further than that and to talk about things they don't want you to know. And big pharma can't make money from this, so they are burying this information. sort of feeding you this conspiracist ideation into distrusting medicine as a whole and distrusting science as a whole because they have the answer. And that, as I mentioned, can have some very real physical harms. Another red flag of pseudoscience is that they tend not to be a fan of peer review and of criticism. Now, scientists and medical doctors are not always very receptive to criticism, but in science, we understand why peer review is so necessary and why criticism is healthy, even if sometimes it stings. But in pseudoscience, the kinds of people who are selling you this kind of garbage, they tend not to take kindly to criticism. Another red flag of pseudoscience is what I call blinding with science, using general principles without specific evidence for claims. So what do I mean by that? Often on the websites of these supplements or these gizmos that are being sold, there's a section called The Science or How It Works. And on this page, you will often find a listing of scientific papers that are alleged to prove that the thing that they are selling you has been scientifically validated. But very often when you actually click on these papers and you read the paper or even just the abstract from the paper, you realize that no, this paper does not actually test the specific claims that are being made or the specific product that is being sold. What the paper is, it's a paper about the general principles of, let's say, quantum mechanics. And the makers of a product that is appropriating the science of quantum mechanics to sell you, a disc or a particular supplement or what have you, they will use quantum mechanics and they will use papers in quantum mechanics, for example, and list them on their website saying, see, it shows that my thing works. And this is called blinding with science because most people are not going to click on these papers. Most people may not even be able to understand these papers. And so it's a way of giving a patina of legitimacy to the thing that they're selling you by using real science, but that has not actually tackle the thing that they're selling you, but instead is just looking at general principles of a particular field of science. Another red flag is the absence of progress. Now, this is not every strain of pseudoscience, but there are pseudoscientific fields that were created from whole cloth, let's say 200 years ago by a guy somewhere, and who just had these ideas of how health should work, and created this whole ideology, this whole philosophy, and sold it and started a profession based on this. And this field hasn't changed really at all in those 200 years. So this is something to look for. As we all know, as you know, nutrition and dietetics, they really change the more that we learn about food, the more we learn about physiology. But some fields of pseudoscience don't actually progress. They are created from whole cloth, and a bit like a religion, they don't really change all that much. Another red flag is that any contradictory evidence can usually be explained away. So if you have a piece of criticism against a particular type of pseudoscience, there's always a reason why your criticism is not valid. There's always a reason why no, actually this thing has been shown to work and it works, and there's no way to actually criticize it. It can always be explained away. Another red flag is cherry picking of the evidence. What do I mean by that? I mean that, and this is something that you will be in a better position to assess than your clients because you are aware of the body of evidence on certain issues in nutrition. But what some people will do is that they will pick 3 studies out there that seem to support their claim, and they will ignore the 7 or 12 or 25 other studies that go in the opposite direction. And so they will paint a portrait of scientific knowledge that is that is very, very good for them, for the claim that they're making, but they will ignore the majority of the scientific studies because they actually disagree with them. And if you're not familiar with the scientific literature on this particular topic, then you may not be aware that they are cherry picking the evidence. But that is something that a lot of people in pseudoscience will do. Another trait is the lack of a plausible mechanism. So the things that we discover in science, they generally follow the general principles of what we know about biology, about chemistry, about physics. But often in pseudoscience, they will come up with something that makes no sense, that has no plausibility, given the foundational knowledge that we have about how the world works and how the human body works. There's no plausible mechanism there. And when you will push people for a plausible mechanism, they will often say, well, we don't know how it works, but it works. We have testimonies, it works. Testimonies is another big one. Especially in the health sphere, especially with nutrition, you will often see websites that are littered with testimonials, allegedly from people who took the pill or tried this particular intervention and are reporting that they're feeling better now. And the thing about testimonials is that they're not controlled for. You don't know what else these people did. You don't know what would have happened had they not taken the supplement. So it's what we call dirty data. It's full of confounders. But the human brain loves testimonials and sort of these personal anecdotes, and so people will respond to them very, very strongly. The last red flag that I wanted to bring up for pseudoscience is the platforming of fake experts. And that's a big problem on the internet right now. It used to be very difficult for people who don't have a solid science-based background in a particular discipline to gain a large platform. But now with the internet, it is very, very easy. And so you see people in the field of functional medicine, which is not a real thing. You see alternative health gurus, you see naturopaths, unlicensed nutritionists, chiropractors, homeopaths, who are all coming up with their own take on nutrition and on health. And because they have these credentials, which are coming from institutes, these fake sort of institutes that are made up of people just like them, it gives them a legitimacy that has not been earned. So there are lots of fake experts out there peddling this kind of pseudoscience. There's a lot of common misinformation in the field of nutrition. I'm sure that many of you are already aware of it. But just in case, I wanted to highlight a few things that I myself have noticed over the years that you may want to keep an eye on. The first one, especially now because of COVID, is this claim of boosting immunity. It's this idea that, we're coming up on flu season, for example. I'm going to take this thing, it's going to boost my immunity, and I'm going to be better prepared for this infection, to fight off any potential infection. And the thing about the immune system is that it is extremely complex. It involves a number of chemicals and of different cell types, has different branches. It's not something that you can just quickly boost, crank up or down like it's a thermostat. But a lot of people out there are giving this impression that immunity is something that you can temporarily boost by taking the right things, but it's basically not how this works. There is a way of boosting your immunity in a very selective fashion, and that's being vaccinated. But the kinds of people who will peddle this trope of boosting immunity tend not to be big fans of vaccines. Another common piece of misinformation in the field of nutrition is antioxidants. This was especially true a few years ago, but it's still something that is being brought up again and again. Of course, antioxidants are very real, but the claims that are sort of infused into them are sometimes completely unrealistic, especially when we were talking about effect size of what eating this particular fruit, on a regular basis, what is that going to do to your overall health? The idea of antioxidants has been really blown out of proportion. There's something else, which is the exoticization of health. And it's something that I've noticed, for example, very recently with Netflix's Down to Earth with Zac Efron, which is this sort of travelogue miniseries in which actor Zac Efron travels the world with his buddy who's an alternative health guru. And one of the messages from the show seems to be, and this is echoed in a lot of pseudoscience that we see online, is this idea that the food that we are eating in industrialized nations in the West is low in nutrients now for a variety of reasons, and so we need to go to these foreign countries that have these rare exotic fruits that we can't even bring here, but they have these exotic fruits that will bring you health because these indigenous tribes have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so there is this kind of crass exoticization of health that we see. We see also with certain fruits and certain grains that gain in popularity. If we think about quinoa a few years ago, if we think about the acai berry, you'll see this berry from some exotic country all of a sudden trending, becoming mainstream, and then there's another berry that is trending and becoming mainstream. So there is this phenomenon of exoticizing what good health should be. There's also anti-GMO sentiment, which has not really gone away. So lots of people who are kind of sort of fearful about what genetically engineered food means to our health, and that are spreading a lot of misinformation about genetic engineering. There's the movement known as clean eating, this idea that raw food is better. There's a good reason why we cook our food. It's often to get rid of microorganisms that can cause disease. And in fact, there have been many cases of people getting sick from eating raw sprouts if they're contaminated, which seems to happen quite often. Supplements and vitamins, that's a big thing in the field of nutrition. There are, again, I mentioned briefly functional medicine, where this idea is particularly pronounced, where they will run a whole battery of tests that you don't really need, and based on those test results, they will give you a shopping list of 50 or so supplements that you need to be taking on a daily basis in order to optimize your health, most of which have very little scientific evidence behind them. So this belief in, and it's very, very funny also because a lot of people who are doing promotion for these kinds of supplements tend to be very anti-pill, anti-medicine, but they are actually the ones that are selling you a ton of pills that you don't need in the form of supplements. But because these supplements are seen to be natural, even though of course these supplements don't grow on a tree, they have to be extracted, they have to be concentrated, they have to be put into these pills. But because they have this natural aura around them, somehow they're okay. Obviously, there's the idea of diets, which you're well aware of. These sort of diets that sort of come and go, and the just like the acai berry, they will become mainstream, and then they will be supplemented by a different diet. The carnivore diet is one that I saw very recently that I found to be particularly egregious. That was popularized by Jordan Peterson and his daughter Michaela Peterson. The idea that some people cannot thrive with fruits and vegetables and grain in their diet. They have to eat steaks and just steaks all day long, which is fairly foolish. And the last thing that I wanted to touch upon is microbiome hype. So the microbiome is all of the bacteria that your body contains, and there's a lot of them. And in particular, there's the gut microbiome, so all the bacteria that we have in our digestive tract. And they do play a very important role in our body, and there are lots of bacteria in there. And scientists are starting to figure out how this works and what its impact may be on our health. But there is still a lot of hype over this, and there are people who are jumping from these early basic research findings into here's a product that you can take right now and that has been proven to improve your health through the microbiome. And of course, it's just no good evidence behind those. As far as I know, perhaps the only intervention on the gut microbiome that has robust scientific evidence behind it is the infamous fecal transplant to treat C. difficile infections. And it is as nasty as it sounds, but it is a transplant of fecal matter to replace the bacteria in your colon so that they can sort of outgrow C. difficile. But there's a lot of hype over all kinds of other ways that we might be able to influence our microbiome, and hopefully one day we will have other robust, scientifically validated interventions, but right now it's still very much early days. I'm not seeing any questions, but if you have questions, please write them in the comments section. This is supposed to last about 30 minutes, so we're coming up towards the end of it. But I'm definitely available to answer a few questions past the 30-minute mark if you want to. I was also asked to provide some good resources for, if you have questions about what is good science, what is bad science, what's trending out there, where does the weight of the evidence lie on certain claims. There are 3 recommendations that I'll make outside of the stuff that I'm personally involved in. But there's a Science-Based Medicine, which is a website that is run by mainly healthcare professionals who take a skeptical look at a number of science, medical, health issues, who will push back against pseudoscience, and they come at it from different perspectives. I mean, there's an oncologist who writes for them, there's a neurologist, there's a dentist, and there's a pediatrician, and a lot of different people who will write on science-based medicine. There's Healthy But Smart, which I quite like. I think it's an Australian website, and they do these sort of systematic reviews of topics, but for the public. So they will look specifically at the evidence behind certain supplements, the evidence behind, eating more of this to treat that, and what kind of scientific evidence do we have? How good is it? How big is the effect? So Healthy But Smart has done some very good work, because a lot of these systematic reviews, when they're done by scientists, they may not be available to the public for reading. They may also be written in a way that is particularly technical, but Healthy But Smart does it in a way that is very accessible. I would also recommend, if you're not on Twitter, I know that there's a lot of people who don't like Twitter and who see this as sort of a battleground where things get pretty nasty, but it really depends on who you follow and the kinds of discussions that you engage in. I follow a lot of very interesting and very wise and knowledgeable experts on a variety of topics, from epidemiology. I follow some journalists. I follow, oncologists. And it's very interesting because when a big sort of watershed paper comes out, it's always very interesting to see what they have to say. And in a way, there's a sort of a post publication peer review that is done on Twitter by these experts, especially now with COVID, given just how quickly things move, to be able to see what these very smart people have to say on the topic of these papers. And some of them will very accurately dig into them and say, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this whole paper is garbage. It can be very useful to get an idea of the strength of a particular piece of evidence. So as I wrap up, I just want to remind you where you can find my work if you're interested in knowing more about pseudoscience, about my take on, what is good science, what is bad science, what is pseudoscience. As I said, all the stuff that I do is linked on my website, jonathanjarry.com, JARRY.com. The podcast that I co-host is called The Body of Evidence. You can find it at bodyofelvidence.ca. You can find it on wherever you listen to your podcast. I do this with Dr. Christopher Labos, who is a cardiologist and epidemiologist, and we try to bring a sort of entertaining take on looking at the scientific evidence behind certain health and medical topics that would be of interest to the public in general. We've been doing it for 5 years now. I'm on Twitter at Cracked Science. And once again, the work that I do for McGill can be found at mcgill.ca/OSS, not just my work, but the work of my colleagues as well. We have a weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's entirely free. It's an email that you get every Saturday listing all of our new articles, all of our media appearances. And again, we have a live stream that we do every other week. The next one will be on Thursday of next week at noon. It is on the Facebook page of the McGill Office for Science and Society. You can type that in and find it in that way. So once again, thank you so much, Build Up Nutrition, for the invitation, and I'll see you on the internet.